New England, cradle of liberty, a land where people once stood for what was just and right, thereby dramatically changing the course of American history. I'm Bruce Page in front of Boston's historic Old North Church. In the more than 200 years since then, citizens of each generation here have faced their own tests of what was just and right, not necessarily putting their lives on the line as 2 centuries ago, but facing tests of integrity nevertheless. This time, New Englanders have been confronted with not an unfair tax, but a controversial and questionable challenge to their freedom of choice, the basic American right to not be restricted in any way from choosing what product to buy in the marketplace. This challenge does not come from the East and the Old World, but from the West, the New World of California, and it comes in the form of a threat some critics clearly see as blackmail of the boardroom. Imagine for a moment yourself a director of a prosperous supermarket chain, accountable to shareholders, public or private, for keeping revenues and profits high and expenses and losses low. The agenda for this particular board of directors meeting shows top priority to be a confidential memorandum stating in part the following.
Before, our objectives were simple: convince stores to honor the boycott by persuading consumers to boycott the stores. Now, our long-term residual purpose is to affect the supermarket's corporate image by associating something negative about the store in the minds of certain groups of consumers which are sympathetic to our cause. The corporate campaign will focus on individual members of the food store's corporate board of directors and bring other companies that are tied to the individual directors, but not necessarily to the supermarket, into the fight on issues such as sexual harassments, farm worker exploitation, and lawlessness by growers. We are especially interested in other firms that are consumer product companies. We will particularly examine banks, insurance companies, and consumer product companies that are connected in any way to the store.
You consider the implications. A group of people is about to create conflict between you and your valued customers, affect your profits, and perhaps seriously, incite hostility from stockholders in this and even any other company you are a director of, unless you capitulate to their demands. This dispute doesn't even involve us, you argue. They're not even our employees. So take your demands and get out. But those who threaten insist their demands must be met, or they will act now. Could such corporate extortion actually happen in America, the bastion of free enterprise? It is happening, and it is affecting you right now. The memo is real, addressed to executive members of the United Farm Workers Union. Author, Cesar Chavez. Chances are that surprises, even shocks you, for the strategy represents a major change in style, which even many liberal thinkers conclude reflects dramatic changes in the UFW leadership personalities themselves. Who would question the United Farm Workers Union was once a widely respected movement, which did indeed achieve many improvements for workers in the fields. But in this year of 1984, the United Farm Workers Union has seized upon a highly questionable and controversial method to achieve its ends. Back to the memo for clues about that.
The language and the issues that work today are consumerism, sexual harassment, and toxics. Our mail will contain repeated appeals to women on the issue of sexual harassment in the fields. We will run checks on these census tracts surrounding stores and rank them according to the number of people from sympathetic demographic groupings: working class and union families, students, young professionals, Jews, blacks, Hispanics, women, etc.
With that so-called high-tech strategy, the UFW chose to involve New Englanders who have become unwitting pawns on a chessboard whose real players are in California, the United Farm Workers Union on one side, Bruce Church Incorporated, the grower of Red Coach brand lettuce, on the other. With mere threats of a scare campaign directed at their customers, a few grocery store chains have chosen not to face those threats head-on with public debate, which New Englanders prize so highly. Instead, to deny shoppers the freedom to choose purchasing Bruce Church's Redcoats lettuce. In an effort to see that freedom of choice restored and the truth of the real issues to prevail, Bruce Church Incorporated invited a cross-section of New England leaders to come to California to see for themselves what the truth really is. Those who accepted, and there were quite a number of them, represented private industry, public service, and educational fields. The company made it clear they were granting complete freedom of access to anything or anybody, endeavoring even to have the United Farm Worker leaders meet with them to add another view to their conclusions. The union declined to meet them. Members of the fact-finding mission were known for their independent thinking, strong opinions not easily changed, and ability to distinguish false voices. Among them, people like Donna Kuha, Boston stockbroker, and a leader of the Women's Political Caucus of Massachusetts. James Coyle, former staff director for Boston City Council, now an independent businessman. Pamela Gilman McDermott, Boston businesswoman, active in many business and civic groups. Bob Spinelli, Boston area businessman and former union member. William Chin, Chinese community leader, owner-operator of numerous Boston restaurants. Tom Cadam, Connecticut attorney and authority on environmental protection. Richard Mercereau, Maine educator and director of public relations for Bowdoin College in Brunswick. Chances are their perceptions before the trip and after may surprise you.
First of all, I have a bias toward the UFW and Cesar Chavez, so my sympathies were more in that direction, if anything. My conceptions or preconceptions were that I would find poverty, bad working conditions, low pay, no benefits, and I was absolutely surprised to find that none of those conditions were true at all.
What were some of the major impressions that you came away with then?
I think that the American public knows very little about what Cesar Chavez is doing now in the UFW, and that that story has to get out. That, in fact, the workers in the Salinas area actually work under very fine conditions and seem very happy with their jobs, and what's happening is that they're being hurt. And I find that, frankly, what Chavez is doing, frankly, very frightening.
I came away with the impression that the farm workers in Salinas, at least working for the Bruce Church Company, were doing a hell of a lot better than people like myself from around here thought they were. One of the comments I made while I was out there is I saw more designer jeans in the field than I'd seen in a discotheque in Boston. I was surprised at the amount of the salaries made by the workers, and I get the figures from the workers themselves when I asked them how much they were making. Big surprise.
What I had envisioned is perhaps workers that were in need of help. I probably could see the people in the fields that were needy, underpaid, and maybe over-supervised. Wasn't really aware of what was involved, but I went with an open mind to see.
What were some of the impressions that you came away with?
Well, I was very surprised. I found that the workers were not in need. They were paid quite well. In fact, the average hourly wage being over $10 an hour.
To my knowledge, I think they get a pretty good fair deal. In other words, their pay is very, above standard, and they seems they are very happy, and they're not complaining to join the union. And I think they are. To me, they have a very a fair treatment as an employee.
I left with the impression, which was in fact verified once I got to California, that the worker was really being left out of the situation. It was really a fight between management and labor. The worker was stuck in the middle, and the worker wasn't being considered. I don't think that I can come back saying that the worker isn't being considered, because I think that they are being considered, but I feel that the worker is incredibly uninformed, really doesn't know that much about the struggle, is kind of the third party, the party that's getting left out, which is unfortunate because that's what the whole negotiation process is about.
The only experience I'd had with that area is literary. Having read Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, I think I was probably thinking somewhat along those terms. I was anticipating what kind of an experience it would be. seeing the farm workers in the huge agricultural plants. I was probably under the impression that the farm workers, their experience in California, I assumed would be similar to the experience that I am aware of in terms of migrant workers in New England.
I fully expected to see conditions that were much worse than what we saw. We had a chance to go out into the fields to interview workers on several different operations within the Bruce Church area, and frankly, I think all of us in the group were impressed with how advanced things were, both the technology, the mechanization. It certainly isn't the operation that you think of back east in terms of migrant labor, picking blueberries or potatoes or something like that.
I discovered that years ago that Cesar Chavez was right, but that was years ago. I discovered that he's wrong now, that he's more on a ego trip than to do something for his workers.
Other similar conclusions have been drawn from yet another surprising voice, The Village Voice, one of the most liberal and therefore usually sympathetic journals of opinion in the country. In a two-part feature story published this summer, consider some of these impressions of reporter Jeff Copeland. There's a growing sentiment here the UFW is a union played out and paranoid, respected neither by growers nor workers, and led by a man who has swapped principles for power. The article goes on to say, despite the most favorable labor law in the country and little competition in the fields, the UFW is floundering. Of 250,000 farm laborers in California, the union estimates 30,000 at most work under UFW contracts, about half the number 12 years ago. Field organizing is at a standstill. It's been 6 years since the last major strike. Fresno County, the premier farm county in the United States, is virtually untouched by the union. Elsewhere, some of the largest unionized farms are going under, a minority unable to compete. Meanwhile, the union devotes its resources to dubious electioneering and the direct mail boycotts currently aimed at chains in the East. There is little or no picketing. No one even has to talk to a consumer. The work is done by computer, which targets sympathetic precincts for the mailing lists. The specific confrontation we're concerned about in this report involves the United Farm Workers Union and Bruce Church Incorporated, one of the nation's largest lettuce growers. By no measurement could you consider Bruce Church management to be anti-union. The company has long-standing, good working relationships and contracts with the Teamsters and the United Food and Commercial Workers, AFL-CIO. The company, in fact, did have a contract with the UFW, which was unable to be renegotiated after expiration in 1979. Reasons for being unable to reach agreement have nothing to do with workers' issues such as wages, working conditions, or related benefits. Once again, members of the fact-finding mission discuss what they found.
I did not get the impression that Bruce Church was anti-union. Again, we did not get to meet with the United Farm Workers. I want to stipulate my comments with that fact, but Bruce Church has contracts with other unions. The Teamsters is one, the United Fruit and Farm Workers Union, something to that effect. There are two other union contracts. I feel strongly that Bruce Church wants a union contract. And I also came away with the impression that the workers wanted a union contract.
And every worker in the field will tell you this, that Bruce Church is the best lettuce company to work for. They give the best benefits. They do more for their workers than anybody else, and they all want to work for Bruce Church. They all feel that they need some kind of representation. They all feel that. Most of them feel anybody else but Cesar Chavez would be better for them.
Donna, if the UFW Bruce Church dispute is really not about wages, it's not about benefits, not about working conditions, what do you now perceive it to be?
I think it's about control. Who controls the company? And what I think is happening with Chavez is that he's on a mission to control the politics of the country, the politics of California, control companies for his own purposes. I don't see him working for the benefit of the workers at all. I see him doing something on his own, somewhat as a messianic dictator or something. I was appalled by what I think he's doing.
The union has attempted a variety of strategies to impose its demands. The most recent and most effective has been to threaten the image of the retailer in the eyes of his consumers, thereby hurting the grower. How do you threaten the image of a retailer? You take the most popular public concerns of the 1980s, as revealed in the Chavez memos, and you create emotionally gripping tales from former individual workers, sort of a personal note from their home to your home, in simulated handwriting. Take, for example, this story from one Martina Zuniga. Martina claims in the letter, which is presented as to be in her own handwriting, that she was denied preferential treatment because she refused to date her foreman. Further, she claims, other young women were approached by foremen and told they would be demoted if they also refused dates. And another example, Manuel Amaya. He claims weed killers used by the grower caused his hand to become infected, and he claimed that the cost of medical help was too much because Bruce Church Incorporated had no insurance, so he didn't seek help until too late, when his arm had to be amputated. What was the reaction that you got when you read those mailers to the actual workers themselves?
What we got was surprise and shock from most of the workers. Most of those workers had, number one, never seen the mailers, which gets back to my point of the workers being uninformed. Number two, did not know of the incidents that were described in the mailers. And number three, I think in fact, they laughed about them. I mean, they were all speaking Spanish and we were speaking English, and there was one woman who was translating in the audience, and she would translate the letter and the rest of them would laugh because it seemed to be something that they knew nothing about.
Some men worker over there, they make a joke. We are harassed by the woman.
Women, in fact, laughed about it when we talked to them about it. They said, "Are you kidding? They're going to bother us?" You know, everybody laughed. I'm sure it exists, but not to the degree that Chavez says. He talked about 10 deaths that had occurred within the last how many years at Bruce Church properties, and that's very misleading because it sounds like Bruce Church is responsible for those deaths when in fact 3 people died from a car accident after having been out partying, had nothing to do with Bruce Church. 3 people died in an airplane accident on a foggy day, had nothing to do with Bruce Church, and so on and so forth. So it's very misleading. And the other things about sexual harassment and bad working conditions, poverty, the toxins in the ground that they have to work with, all misleading. I didn't find any of that. In fact, the exact opposite in most cases.
That must astound you.
It surprised me. Yeah, it surprised me a lot.
I must say I was impressed with their pesticide control program. They had a very thorough situation where they identified the nature of the pesticide being applied to the field. They had it calendared in a central office. They had signs that were posted in the areas in both English and Spanish. I thought they were very careful about that.
The blackmail of the boardroom, then, is the threat by the UFW to send these emotional, heart-touching, heart-rending mailers to selected homes in a retailer's neighborhood. The pressure of a threatened economic boycott by the UFW of grocery stores in New England is not new, dates back to 1979. That strategy was aimed directly at consumers, asking them not to buy one specific product in a store rather than avoid the store altogether. What is significant this time is that a supermarket board of directors has backed down rather than face the issue head-on, still giving the power of choice to the consumer. One large grocery chain, for example, faced tremendous pressure from the UFW over a period of 5 years. That chain elected to lay out displays of Red Coach lettuce alongside other brands with information about the issues as both the UFW and growers see them, leaving the freedom of choice of product to the consumer. With the new threats, however, threats of the boardroom, a few retailers determined it to be in their best interests not to buy Red Coach lettuce altogether. The end result is that hundreds of thousands of shoppers in New England are now denied their former right to choose what lettuce they can buy and eat. And it happened without even one cannon fired. Not one threat followed through on. How is blackmail of the boardroom affecting you more with each passing day? At the Labor Day 1984 convention of the UFW, Cesar Chavez targeted not only Redcoats lettuce, but added Chiquita bananas, California table grapes, and citrus, and extended his high-tech secondary boycott to the 7-Up Company, Sunkist, and the Sony Corporation. Should that concern you? It certainly concerns the fact-finding mission of leaders from New England.
I don't think that Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers really want this particular battle to come to an end. There's more at stake. So far as what farmers or what organizations would do here, I think they're going to have to really become involved and learn and take a look closely at what is happening in California, because truly, if there isn't a reversal and Cesar Chavez is able to use the high-tech methods to intimidate retailers, to not have the products put on the shelves so that we, the buyers, are unable to receive it, this could boomerang and have a devastating effect for other products around the country.
A supermarket chain could be told next week that they better not buy Wheaties and be shown similar pieces of material. And then where do we stop?
The corporate boycott concept does, in my opinion, have long-term ramifications to which go well beyond this particular situation. And what I mean by that is that if a particular group utilizes mass technology to identify one particular thing that they're trying to stop or slow down or something, that particular concept could apply to areas that impinge on First Amendment rights. And as an attorney, that bothers me.
As a stockbroker, you are very much involved with corporations. How do you see the potential impact of corporate boycotts affecting American business?
I think it's, as I said, it's very dangerous. I think if it's not stopped, I think business owners like Bruce Church can be forced into bankruptcy. I think it's bad. I think everyone has a right to sell goods and services, and if people want to boycott themselves, fine, the products, but not an institution, not a store, just because it carries something for some other third party, and they in fact are having a dispute. I think that needs to be taken care of separately than the way it's being handled. I think it's bad for business.
The thoughts and concerns of these New England leaders were expressed in mid-September. Only days later, the fears they prophesied were realized. McDonald's, the fast food giant, and a satisfied customer of a Bruce Church sister company over the past 5 years, became yet another victim of the spreading Chavez cancer. McDonald's abruptly ceased buying from the firm, joining the handful of grocery store chains that had previously given into the threatened blackmail of their boardroom. Freedom of choice, is that not the real issue in this situation? And have you considered what other freedoms of choice could be taken from you and all Americans if the UFW threat of an economic boycott is successful on a product as simple as lettuce?